Okay, hi everybody. I'm here with my friend Anthony, and we're talking about a movie that we just saw. We both seen this movie before already, but we wanted to refresh our memories about it to be kind of sharp about it. It's this movie here called Two of Us, and it was made by VH1, I believe, and it was a TV film that came out in around 2000 or so, and directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg, who Beatle fans out there will know that he did Let It Be. He was the director, if you can call it that.
I never knew that.
Yeah, see, learn something new all the time, Anthony. And, well, I saw this when it first premiered, and we wanted to, like I say, go through it again. The story about this is it's mostly a fictional account of a what-if type of thing. What would have happened in 1976 if John and Paul had gotten together? Now, it's pretty well known that they did get together at John's place in the Dakota, maybe more than once. And there's accounts from both John and Paul about this happening. So some of the events are real, and some of them are completely,
Fabricated.
fabricated, and and some of them for artistic license. They went ahead and did it. We got Aidan Quinn, who's playing Paul McCartney, and we got Jared Harris, who plays John Lennon. I'll get into that, what I think about their performances a little later on. But the general idea is that, this is the time in 1976 where, John Lennon is kind of a recluse living in the Dakota apartment buildings in New York City. And Paul McCartney's kind of, riding high with his band Wings. And Silly Love Songs is a big #1 hit on the radio. And Wings at the Speed of Sound is a big album. And he decides one day he's going to just pop a surprise visit on his old bandmate, John Lennon, who's in the Dakota building just hanging around. And that's what the crux of this is, okay?
So one's riding high, one's riding low, so to speak.
Yeah, that's what they say. Now, I have some notes here I might be looking at just so I don't forget what I want to talk about. But, well, to start with, let's talk about the performances in here. Well, what do you think of, we'll start with, I guess because he's top billed, Aidan Quinn as Paul McCartney. What do you think of him?
I think he gave a pretty good performance for a made-for-TV movie or cable movie. You know what I mean?
I didn't think he was. I couldn't really believe that he was Paul McCartney.
I can't say it was terrible, but I can't say it was great.
Yeah, I mean, he tried to do some of the things a couple of times over there, going like this. He's nervous.
McCartney gestures.
Going like this one time and stuff. Trying to be like Paul. I think maybe he watched like one interview or something to get an idea.
Yeah.
But and he's doing this really poor, to me anyway, this McCartney-ish accent. I think I do a better McCartney accent than he does, actually. But anyway, but on the other hand, I thought that Jared Harris was better as John Lennon. I don't know. I kind of
Slightly
for me. You think? I mean, I kind of bought the idea that he was John Lennon. I could kind of see him as Lennon a little bit
more than the other guys. McCartney.
Yeah, a little bit. Not that any of them were great, but I kind of thought he captured the essence of Lennon better than McCartney. Well, that's
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I mean, like I said, I don't think their performances were terrible, but they weren't terrific. It was like in the center.
So we're kind
it's
of
not Oscar caliber,
I know.
Far from it.
So we're kind of a like mind on that. Well, when the movie starts, McCartney goes over to Lennon's apartment, and they got Lennon all bored, depressed.
Nothing to do.
He's just hanging around, because a lot of these things have happened over the years through the internet, and this is before the internet, but tell-all books and tabloid stories that John was just lazy, did nothing around the house except mope a lot. They could have showed him being a little bit more, I don't know, active, doing anything, even if whether he was baking bread or whether he was just having fun, doing demos on his tape recorder, whatever. But instead, they just have him sitting around playing with the faucet, the water faucet, seeing, smoking a cigarette.
They have him sitting around smoking funny cigarettes.
Well, that I could see, But anyway, there's even one part when McCartney finally decides to go visit John, and the intercom goes on the telecom. Lennon's like, he wants to know who it is, right?
Gets startled, yeah.
He's like, oh, he can't believe it.
When the intercom rings, yeah.
We should also mention from the top that I forgot to mention something important, that for this movie they have Yoko Ono. she's away on business, buying a cow or selling a cow or something.
Yeah.
So it's convenient so that it's just John and Paul. Nobody's there but John and Paul in this visit. There's no Yoko. And then when John answers the telecom, he says, presses to see who it is, and he's like, "Help me! I'm trapped inside this little box." And I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, come on!" Like Lennon's just like dying in there or something like that. They got to play up on that thing that Lennon's like, miserable,
Totally bored.
But I know. Then of course they got to try to play up this thing where I take exception to a lot, where Yoko's supposed to be so controlling of John to the point where the Paul McCartney character says, "Well, you look kind of thin," and he says, "Yeah, Yoko's got us on a macrobiotic diet." I mean, John went along quite willingly, as I seem to remember. They make it sound like, Mother's got us on this macrobiotic diet and everything. So I don't know. What else can I say? There's moments in there that work to me. I think a lot of it to me is kind of talky. I don't mind movies that are talky, and there's not a lot of action. I mean, that's good. I'd rather get into the psychological heads of these two.
Yeah.
So that's interesting as a Beatles fan to see this. But after a while, I thought it was a little too much. I don't know, a little too talky at times in the apartment. Even though some of it was interesting. What do you think, Anthony?
Well, it seems like they were trying to analyze like why the Beatles broke up and why John was in this state of mind, and what he was doing with himself, and Paul was out there on top of the world with the silly love songs and the #1 song and album and all this and that. And it seems like they were trying to analyze why they broke up, what the tension was between them, and one guy's doing one thing this way and the other guy's not doing anything.
Because they're both, portrayed as very different,
Yeah.
which of course was the dynamic and why they were so good together, why they wrote so much good music. You had John one way and Paul was the other way. At one point, they get into a little bit of an argument. They start snapping at each other, which is going to happen, remembering the old days and this and that. And John refers to Paul's songs as nursery rhymes in one part, something like that, which I thought was interesting.
All you do is sing silly love songs now.
Yeah, why don't you?
You needed me, without me, this is what you're doing.
Yeah, Lennon was like that. You're saying stuff like that. Then there's a part where it's not among my favorite sequences, though. They decide that they're going to finally get out of the apartment, and go outside instead of just hanging around a boring old apartment. And Paul says, "Why don't we go out, to the park or something?" And John's like, "Out there? Out there?" And I'm sitting there telling John went out. John went out a lot. He went out. We walked around with Yoko and everything, and with the baby. This business, like as if he never came out of the apartment, or something like that. That's another fabrication, But anyway, I think it's interesting to note something I didn't tell you. I don't know if you knew this or not, but before, something I didn't tell you before the movie, but. In 1968, John and Paul came to New York City to get on the Tonight Show to talk about the formation of the Apple Corporation.
Yeah.
And it's a rarely seen footage. Johnny Carson wasn't there. It was Joe Garagiola was there back in '68. But there was a time when they're discussing, there's a very crude clip of this that survives. That's out there on the collector's circle. And at one point I think they say John and Paul did go out in '68. They went out in the city, to Central Park, and supposedly either nobody recognized them then, or nobody in '68. This is, or gave them a hard time. I remember them saying nobody bothered you or anything.
They said this on the show.
They was talking about that on the show, that they went out and nobody bothered them. But in this movie,
quite possible.
That's what's funny. In this movie, they put disguises on. Well, the mustache, maybe a hat and dark glasses and stuff like this. I found all that stuff kind of dull. They're out in the park and
they look like two Charlie Chaplins the way they were dressed.
Charlie Chaplins, and they're out there, and that part didn't bother. It didn't impress me. I should say, kind of didn't bother me, but it didn't impress me. And then there's a scene where they go into a restaurant, and in the restaurant, they talk some more. And naturally, there's a part where somebody's going to recognize them in there, which is kind of funny to me. Now, through this whole movie, though, nobody recognizes Paul McCartney. I mean, they know John Lennon because Lennon is in the city, you know, and they used to see him around the city. So he goes to restaurants and things like that outside. But with Paul McCartney, you know, even when the character Paul, you know, takes off his dark glasses and sits with nobody says, "Oh, it's Paul. Are you Paul?" What is this, Clark Kent syndrome? It's like Clark Kent. You put on a pair of glasses, nobody knows it's Paul. It's like Superman, you know.
Yeah.
What the hell is that? But anyway, there's a scene in there where a kid, naturally a teenage kid, recognizes John, and they're sitting at this table, John and Paul, and he goes up, "Oh, you know, I want to tell you, you know, you're my hero," and you know, and John's like, "Well, when are you gonna get over that? And when are you gonna?" He snaps at the kid, you know, and it's like the kid, and you know, everybody knows John could be like that, and I'm sure that stuff like that happened. I'm sure, but did they have to play it up that big for the movie? You know, John was being kind of a jerk. You know what I mean? John could be. But there's also a lot of stories that are out there that people have met him, and he was pretty cool. Like to shake hands, would give an autograph.
Yeah, well, this movie was like he was belittling the guy, it looks like.
Yeah, he was belittling him in the movie. Like, what are you going to get on with your life and forget it? I mean, that did happen. There's stories of that. Where, yeah, John would do that occasionally. I guess it's fair game. But they didn't show enough of the good side of John in this movie. The tender side, when stuff came along like that, people would...
Well, I guess it's because in this movie he seems like he was struggling with himself.
Yeah,
that's why he was in that seclusion.
They wanted to emphasize that part, that facet. But, you know, I just say, if you're a person out there that, say, a younger person maybe doesn't know that much right away about John and the Beatles, and you see this particular movie, people go away. That's the only problem I have with films like this that take liberties, Anthony. You know, they wind up all of a sudden thinking that's everything's a fact, verbatim. This is just the way everything happened. Not necessarily. You know, you got to take this movie with a grain of salt, and most movies like this, you know, biopics. And then, let's see, the young fan. Then they have a thing where there's an older man and his older wife come over, and
when they're in the restaurant.
Yeah, remember the part with yesterday?
Yes.
Well, tell them what the guy says with the yesterday part.
Well, he says, you know, I love the way you sing yesterday. Could you sing a couple of bars for my wife? She was an absolute fan.
And of course, that happened in real life too. A lot of times, I mean, not that exact scene, but John always said, like, you know, there's one talk show. He says, you know, a waiter would come over and insisted on playing yesterday with his violin right in my ear. He said, you know, things like that. So it's a fabrication of something that might have happened. But the guy's like, "Oh, you know, I love you. Favorite Beatles song is Yesterday that you wrote," you know, and right away. But he starts fuming and he starts
flustered, angry.
He says all his angry stuff to the woman, and you know, offends them in a way and stuff like that. I get kind of over the top. You know, I don't know that it would have worked like that exactly. And then I noticed when they go after that, they go back into the Dakota building. You know, I see a view from outside. It's not the Dakota. They got some other building that, if you didn't know any better, you'd think it was the Dakota. You know, it's got an archway and it's got concrete walls and things like that. But it's not the Dakota. You think they really spared every expense here? I could see they didn't.
Maybe they weren't allowed to film there. I don't know.
Maybe they weren't allowed. I don't know the facts behind this, but it wasn't the real Dakota. You know.
Yeah, that you could see.
I got to say though, there's a rooftop scene when they're on the roof, and I like the scene at the end. They're having a real heart-to-heart, you know, friend-to-friend talk. And I love, there's a bit when Paul kind of analyzes John.
Yeah. Tries
to get into his psyche, remember that?
Yeah.
And he's like telling him, you know, I see a frightened little boy when I look at you, you know. And, you know, I forget what else he says to him. He analyzes John, and he says, "This is what I see." Because John takes his glasses off. "What do you see when you look at me?" You know, and he tells him. And then John starts crying, you know, shedding tears, you know, because you don't have to be like this in front of me, with me, you know. We're together on a roof. And it really was a touching moment. That's my favorite moment of the movie.
You know, he tells him all the good about him and all the bad about him.
Yeah, he tells him, you know,
fears and and everything
all
like
the
that.
good things about him. You don't need this facade, or you don't need this fear to put this, you know,
guilt on yourself and things like that.
Yeah, so I really like that scene. That's my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, it was good.
And finally, to wind up, we come up with this scene at the end, how they decide to end the movie. And some of you know this, some of you won't know it, but it's a true story that when John and Paul were in the Dakota on one of these visits, they watched TV and Saturday Night Live, the New York show that was live from right down the block, practically, right, was being shown on TV, and there was a skit that a lot of people who know the show know, where the creator of the show, Lorne Michaels, gets on there and he's reading from a script, and he says, I want to extend an offer to just 4 people out there, the Beatles, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. This is an offer for you to come to our studio right now and, do a live performance. We'll give you $3,000. And
Yeah.
John and Paul were, in fact, watching this. And the reason we know this is because in separate interviews over time in history, both John Lennon and Paul McCartney corroborated that. They both said, yes, that happened.
Yeah.
We were at the Dakota watching this together. So both men acknowledged it. And the way they set it up, though, for artistic license in the movie is kind of ridiculous. He says, come on down. If you want to give Ringo less, that's up to you.
Yeah.
That's part of the joke. And they're, no, that's not fair. They say Ringo.
We love Ringo.
And they're laughing. And I think all of a sudden, John jumps up in the movie and he's like, "Let's do it. Let's do it." And Paul's like, "I don't know. Why? Should we? Sure. Yeah, let's do it. Get on guitars. We could do something. Heavily Brothers, whatever." And Paul's like, "Well, what if I, what he called it?
What if we were no good?
What if I'm no good? What if he says, don't worry about it. It'll be fine." So all of a sudden he convinces Paul, "Yeah, let's go." And they jump up, and Paul gets ready. He's getting his instrument. They're all going down the guitar. He's getting down into the limo or wherever he is.
Ready to jam.
And then all of a sudden, just as John's he has his guitar in hand. Here's the part I hate the most about the movie, and I can't stand this. They have it set up that Yoko Ono calls on the phone. And Lennon answers the phone, and it's Mother. And all of a sudden, Mother talks to John. He curls into a fetal position, and he's like, "Oh, hi, Yoko." And all of a sudden, Paul's like, "What's up? I thought we were going down there." But Yoko's on the phone. Yeah. Yoko's called, Anthony. Yoko ruined it again, right? She broke up the Beatles again, right? That pissed me off. That never happened. In fact, both John and Paul said, we thought about it, and Paul in particular, we thought about it for like a split second. Hey, wouldn't that be great? But we never went. It's not very exciting for a movie, I'll grant you
So
that.
it's not that Yoko called, huh?
No, Yoko never called. Yoko never broke up an opportunity for John and Paul to go down to Saturday Night Live. What a reunion that would have been. But because people got to, hate on Yoko, they got to fit that in for the ending of the movie. And that's the ending of the movie. I spoiled the ending for you, I didn't tell you so. I should have said that at the beginning. There's spoilers here. That's ridiculous. Totally fabricated. Total garbage and nonsense. And that part I really hated, they almost would have reunited. Imagine, some people are going to watch that and say, wow, gee, man, dude, did you know that John and Paul were, going to get together? But Yoko Ono, called in that witch and she ruined it for them? Never happened. But anyway, it would have been, you couldn't just have them sit there and say, hey, look at each other and say, forget it. They thought of it for a split second, according to Paul and John, but they didn't go down. They should have, though.
Oh, that would have been great.
Imagine, that would have been great. Anyway, so that's the movie, and upon watching it, we decided we're going to give it a star rating. A scale from 1 to 4, 4 stars, with 1 being, poor, 4 being excellent. So what I did was we wrote down. I suggested this. Anthony wrote down his rating. I wrote my rating, and now we don't. Neither one of us knows what the other one's giving it, what rating it's going to be. So we're going to hold it up one at a time. Anthony, why don't I let you go first? On a scale of 1 to 4, what did you give this movie? 2.5 stars. I like the way the stars go.
Yeah.
Well,
That's right.
That's very fair, Anthony, because I gave it
Oh, okay.
2 stars.
Pretty much the same
Which just
ballpark.
pretty much means fair, kind of average, fair, kind of like maybe a little above average in your case, like that. I don't need to see it again. I saw it a couple of times now. I would have no interest in seeing it again, but I think if you're a Beatle fan, interested in John and or Paul, I think it's worth a watch.
Post Beatle.
Post Beatle or with the Beatles, give it a watch. What the hell? It's worth watching once. And it's got some moments and some stuff between the two men psychologically. So that's my feelings on it, Anthony. And thank you very much for joining me.
You're welcome.
And may I say that this was Anthony's idea. He thought this up. That we should watch this and do this. Thanks, Anthony.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everybody, for for watching.
So long.